We are speaking with Simon Morrison from Dead Century. G'day, Simon.
Hey, Hermione, how you doing?
I'm good. Now, I have a bit of a first question. Like, is it Dead Centuries or Dead Century?
It's Dead Sentries, plural.
Dead Centuries. That is a grim band name.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Okay. There's a painting by a famous German painter of a guy in a trench. It's called Dead Century. Nowadays, that's also a Texas thrash band that don't have anything to do with us. I came up with the name Dead Centuries in about 2012, and literally I was just sort of walking around in Berlin thinking, I need a band name. I need a band name. And then I had to figure out what I thought it meant, which took some more time. The band, like we've got all this philosophy behind what we do, and we try very hard to put a lot of thought behind stuff. So the band name kind of reflected our belief that our systems are failing us. Across the world, our political leadership, the business leadership, all this,
Yep.
uh, and there's nobody on watch. There's nobody protecting us. So it alludes to that.
I think you bang on there.
Yeah.
You're in Berlin.
My wife and I have been here for a little over 11 years now. We never expected to be here for so long. I'm a Australian and British citizen, so at that time I was EU, so it
Mhm.
was really easy to come here, and we thought we'll try it for a year, we'll see what happens, and then through a series of events, we managed to be lucky enough to get an apartment, and then we got our furry little Berlin anchor child.
For
Um,
11 years.
we got to Berlin at Christmas time in 2011.
What drew you to Berlin in particular?
Wasn't anything to do with music. We just really liked sort of the feel of Berlin and the freedom of the city.
What
And
Berlin are you in?
we bounced around, Neukölln. We were in Neukölln for a long time. Um, we were like right near the wall in Kreuzberg and Friedrichshain, which is the big party sort of districts there, for a little bit. We were even in Schöneberg for a while, which is over the other side of the city, which was where Bowie and Iggy used to live. And we ended up, uh, technically, we're part of Mitte, which is the middle of the city. And it's a bit more of, I guess, a multicultural kind of place, a bit more down at heel, I suppose, than some of our flashier neighbors. And it's not a party suburb or anything.
Nice. And when you were living in Australia, where were you actually from in Australia?
I grew up in Mornington and hated it. And as soon as I could, I left and went to Melbourne and lived in St Kilda for a while, and then moved over to Northcote and
Oh
Thornbury.
yeah. Yeah, wow.
Yeah. When my wife and I got together, I moved in with her, and she had a flat in North Fitzroy, so
Oh
we were
yeah.
kind of based together. Yeah.
That's where I started. So I'm originally from Adelaide when I moved over and my first flat was in North Fitzroy, just behind the Terminus Hotel.
Oh yeah, right.
It's funny, like while you mention your wife, lovely Kate is pretty much the reason why I know you. So I was on
Yeah.
Mess Boys and I was involved in that kind of scene. It was a good way to get to know people when I first moved to Melbourne. And Kate was on there as Paigey, I think.
Yeah.
And then that whole chat thing was such an interesting energy because everybody kind of knew each other and it was a real community, but I still love chat romances. Were you on Mess and Noise yourself?
I was. This is, I guess, part of music and what it's done for me in my life, um, in that it's given me this community, and I met my wife via that. So I had gotten back from Sweden, and we'd had a pretty big family tragedy, and I was a mess, and I wasn't really doing anything. And at that time, my brother Joel, who's Old Bar Joel for people that know him, Joel's like, why don't you join this band? I'm in this band called the Assassination Collective. Brendan from the Stabs was in it, as the bass player, and he quit because I don't know. I think amplifiers fell on him during a gig, and it was all a bit chaotic. And he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. You people are crazy. Go. I mean, they were like this chaotic party political punk band, and I'd seen them a couple of times, and they went from being brilliant to being terrible.
What was the difference?
The sobriety of the people involved, different levels of whatever was happening at the time.
I
And
can't
they
talk.
went
I've got a glass of wine on the go. I'm so far from
to,
sober at the moment, so
yeah,
it's nighttime in Melbourne. It's okay.
yeah, it's daytime here, so I'm still on.
That's sick. So the bands that listening to your music, the bands that you guys made me think of were Devo, Black Flag, Dead Kennedys, and it was really about having a political agenda and using punk music to express it. Do you think that's a fair assessment of how you guys rock?
Yeah, Devo's interesting. Definitely, like the idea was to mix something like Black Flag and the Kennedys and the Jesus Lizard and Shellac with something that had a bit more groove and sort of swing to it, like Early Birthday Party or Lubricated Goat and
I
that
was
kind
thinking,
of stuff.
I think we do have to talk about the birthday party, even if only briefly, because in my mind, that's the big Melbourne, like the big Melbourne Berlin connection. It's that.
The birthday party were really important to me, and I think still stand as just this iconic kind of dark art rock thing.
Weren't like other bands. And I kind of grew up knowing the birthday party songs partly because the Screaming Jets covered them, which is largely, recognized as being a pretty lame reason for knowing the birthday party. But I felt a bit kind of guilty for not knowing that it was the birthday party. But they don't tell you, like when a band gets famous for doing a cover, they kind of hide that from you.
Yeah, they don't come out with it. No, it was all a bit of a thing. Like I said, I didn't move to Berlin because of the music scene. I moved here to kind of just experience Europe. And once we got a bit settled, it was like, okay, well, now music should happen. I joined the Assassination Collective and just realized, well, I've been wasting all these years not being in bands. I should have been doing music. And of course, I was on Mess and Noise. I joined that and got involved in that whole thing, and still know people. It's a shame that that resource went away because it was this great place where you could just talk to musicians and get all this kind of information and stuff.
The people who are in Dead Centuries, just it's a three piece. You got Jason, Kenny, and Stefan Wides.
Vides. Yeah.
Vides. Now, are
Yeah.
they Melbourne expat Berlin people, or where do they fit in?
Again, this is like the connections that you make through music. Because when I moved to Berlin, we knew two people in Berlin, two Australians. One was a DJ from Adelaide who goes under the name of Jimmy Trash. It turned out like Katie had stayed with him when she'd been backpacking on her own. We got here and I met him and I'm like, you booked the Assassination Collective in Adelaide like years ago. They didn't ask us back. I'll put it that way. We got, we got we started and the audience like left apart from Jimmy and a couple of his mates, and I think we broke a few things and the guy banned us from the venue. That was kind of like what happened with that band. When I got here, I knew Jimmy and we knew a lady named Sam Waring, who was from Melbourne and was in Melbourne music scene. And I started playing bass for Sam in a band called Wasp Summer. We got a rehearsal room. Like in Berlin, you can get these old office, like derelict office spaces. So you get this huge building out in the middle of nowhere, and you basically get an old office. And you can put a PA in there and whatever, you get 24-hour access rehearsal space. That's how I met Stefan, because his band had one. I met him, and then I said, like, well, do you want to, like, I need a drummer. Shall we have a rehearsal? And so we did, and I played a few songs. I think I had two at the time. And we stopped, and he was like, yes, yeah, okay. And I went, all right. So, like, are you in? And he's like, yeah, okay. I'm like, I met Jason. There was a Wasp summer gig. Sam knew Jason. He turned up, and we were just drinking afterwards. And Sam's like, Simon needs a bass player. And Jason said, well, I'm not really a bass player. I'm a guitarist, but I'll do it. I'm in. And I'm like, well, do you not want to hear the music? And he's like, no, I just saw you play. It's fine.
So musically, did you grow up in a musical family? Did you have music around you?
No, I've got a pretty weird sort of origin story. My nobody in my family played music. Um, they were into music though, and we were always like listening to stuff. My uncle was a big influence on my brother and I, because he was really into blues, especially John Lee Hooker. So lots of blues music. I ended up having like this problem with my ears when I was a kid, when I was like 4 or something. And I went deaf for like a year. And it took them ages to figure it out because I figured out how to lip read. So, you know, right.
You're asking.
Yeah. Um, anyway, they eventually figured it out. I went and got some minor surgery which fixed the problem. And the first thing that my father did, and I was 5 at this time, he said, like, all right, we're going to go see Stevie Wonder. So we went to Festival Hall and saw Stevie Wonder on the 1981 Hotter Than July tour. Um,
Oh, that's a great origin story. Keep going. Keep going.
I've still got the like the little handbook thing that you got given out at that time for the gig. I've still got that. Yeah, yeah. I came back home and I said, well, I want to play piano. And they bought me a piano, and I played, I think, from the age of 5 to about 7.5, and then gave it up. Yeah. Then in my teens, I met a guy. I was very unpopular at school, but I fell into like heavy metal and was into like, I found a Black Sabbath tape in a garage when I was like 11 years old, and it kind of just changed my life. Um,
Well, so
yeah.
like Sabbath? Who else? Like who else was
Yeah. Oh, I just used to buy everything because there was, you had to like stay up until like 3 in the morning watching Rage and listening to like PBS and Triple R at like 1 in the morning to just like hear this stuff. There was the magazine Hot Metal, which was huge because yeah, right.
like the
Yeah,
R&B people scare the shit out of me. Metal
yeah,
kids are
definitely.
cool.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. I mean, I'd just go and buy stuff. Like it'd have a review, or I'd like the cover, or somebody else would talk about it in an interview, and I'd just go and buy it. And then I met a friend, and he's like, "Oh, you like metal?" And I was hated at school for that, but he was into it and turned me on to all this other stuff. And then and he had a guitar. I was like, "Wow, you've got a guitar!" And so he taught me how to play. A couple of years later, I think I saw a Henry Rollins film clip on Rage. It was what am I doing here? It was like 2 in the morning, and I was like, "That's insane." And then shortly after that, I heard Jello Biafra on PBS or something. Like all of a sudden, heavy metal just seemed a bit silly, like all this like Satan and serial killers and stuff. When these guys are talking about real
Holiday in
things,
Cambodia.
yeah,
Yeah,
and just like stuff that's personal and political and mattered. But the music was super interesting.
yeah,
Uh, so I switched totally, got all these punk records, got heavily into Black Flag and Jello and all this other stuff. So I got like this knock on the door, and a friend of mine's there with these 2 other kids that I don't know, which was a bit dodgy in my neighborhood. And I'm like, who are these guys? Uh, and my friend, well, this is Conrad and this is Paul.
is this in
And
Mornington?
this is in Mornington. And they're like, well, they want to see your record collection. And Paul says, I know that he said, you've got Black Flag records. And he said, I've got like Descendants records, and maybe we can like, you know, have a bit of a listening trade. I'm like, well, I don't know who they are or who you are,
And you're not having my
uh,
records? No.
but come on in, because I had a friend vouch for him.
Sentence was
Anyway, that ended up being a punk band that went for a few years, and together we all like that was the great part of the 90s when everything just exploded.
so those the two randoms that turned up on your doorstep in Mornington ended up being in a band with you?
Yeah.
Sick. I love it.
And we discovered like Fugazi and Ein Stößende Neubauten and just everything. And that was like when Helmet came out and the big day outs were happening, and all those all the underage gigs were happening.
Yeah.
So we would like get on a bus for 40 minutes, get on a train for an hour, go to some like underage gig and then come home, and we'd do that. Conrad, my friend who taught me to play guitar, I still know it. He still plays. He fell out of it for a bit, but he's still playing. Conrad was a singer, and he's now making his own music and raising a family. Paul went on to do something for Kate. Yeah.
But Sandpit were sick. They were really good.
I think the whole like time that I was coming up with it, and yourself as well,
You
it
really
was
connect
really
the
special.
dots, I reckon, Simon. I was so spun out that I don't really know who you are. Like, this is such a lovely thing that this is happening
Mm.
because you make a ton of sense to me, but I don't know you, but I do, but I don't. In a way, loving music in Australia can be a bit like being in a play where you don't know which character just walked off before you walked on set. And so
Right.
like you all know each other and the audience knows all of you, but you don't necessarily understand how you're all connected until, you end up, I don't know, organizing an interview or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the connections are crazy, you
Crazy.
know,
Yeah. Like family
and
level crazy.
yeah, yeah. There's this whole community about it. I mean, this is one of the reasons that I personally really miss Melbourne, because it doesn't really happen in Berlin to the same extent. You'd very rarely get a three-band bill, let alone a four.
Yeah.
Um, Most of the underground punk clubs are controlled by noise restrictions, so everything shuts at 10. So your gigs will start at 7:30, and 10 o'clock it's over, because there's not many places to play in Berlin, and the ones that are here, it's very difficult to get in. There's not really a cohesive kind of music scene. A lot of people come from other places to make weird music in Berlin. It's difficult for bands here that are not easily pigeonholed. You would come to Berlin because it had cheap rent, and it's a really good jumping off point for the rest of Europe. So musicians would come here, get a cheap room, they get this 24/7 cheap rehearsal space,
Yeah.
and then they can just tour it constantly. Which I like to say that I've been running a Berlin rock band that did everything wrong, because we've never toured because we haven't had any money, and I haven't been out being like the social butterfly that you need to be to kind of make a connection here. I can do a show and not too many people will turn up, but then I can go see a friend of mine who loves my band and they're really popular. Not to say that we haven't done some good gigs, because we have.
And you've got a new project that's on the roll as well, Remarkable Shipwrecks, which is a great name. How did you come up with that one?
I didn't. My wife did, Katie.
Props, Katie. That is a sick
um,
name.
um, but yeah, Remarkable Shipwrecks um, came about, I guess, from a band I was in just before I left Melbourne called Palomino, which was like a sort of I mean, it was a country folk kind of thing. It was a million miles away from a lot of the stuff that I'd been doing. And some of the songs from that I decided to change, and make this very sparse, very simple, very melancholic folk music. I used to play a classical guitar tuned down to B sharp, which is where that's where Napalm Death and Black Sabbath play. That's like really low. And I found that I had a deeper voice in this register. I decided to stop that and just go with standard tuning and sing in a higher register, and try to move away from the country elements and just get something that's a little groovier, I guess. Uh, Definitely with Remarkable Shipwrecks, that's going to be what I'll be playing for the rest of my life. That's music that I'm trying to do it so that it suits my age and it's appropriate, and it's adult music. Some of the tracks I've got up at the moment are done on just with a digital interface and Ableton. And so everything on those 3 new tracks is me. I don't know how to use any of this stuff, and I don't know how to play drums, but I've managed to program something that's kind of listenable. I'll take Remarkable Shipwrecks with me. Dead Sentries, I mean, it's very much like when I started this band, I said to the two other guys, I'm never going to ask you to do something that you can't afford to do or that you don't want to do. Because I think a lot of bands, because it's expensive and it takes all your time. Going on tour, releasing a record, all this stuff, it's totally like a stupid financial decision to do. You've got to be a bit crazy to do it. Um, and when you're an immigrant in a city like Berlin, you don't have any money. You know, you struggle for a long time. We've played gigs with Dead Sentries where we've looked at each other and like, okay, we made like 60 euros for this show, and we need that. We all need that to buy food.
It's very real in that way, and I think that that's what makes this music important. Like, if you had endless funds and you were totally flush, it would suck musically.
I think that happens. I definitely think like bands get too comfortable and get too wrapped up in their own head, and they have too many people around them that are like, this is a great idea, this is a great idea. And so they get flat.
Never did that though, as well. Being an Adelaide person, Mark of Cain. Like, a lot of people who should know them don't know them because they don't have that kind of money behind them. But also, it means that the kinds of people who do know them have got that investment and have got that angle where they've found it through their own communities. And it means that the community is the real value. And I love that.
Right. They're a big influence on me, I think. We haven't like, I mean, our with Dead Sentries, it's very much those two guys are my best friends. And I'm never going to do this band with anybody else. In the last few years, things have slowed down and become difficult. Both Jason and Stefan has a daughter. Jason has two daughters. There's been various health issues with partners and ourselves and everything. The pandemic didn't help anything.
Yeah.
Um,
Children plus the pandemic have totally changed this
yeah,
stuff. But also, I do think it's done us a bit of a service because it's weeded out the
right.
pretenders.
Um, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not looking at being a professional musician. I hate that term. But I'm not looking at being a musician that makes their living from it. I think there's like different kind of levels of it, of what you want to do and what you want to get out of it.
And that's
I
a
always,
question for a musician. Like, what do you want to get out of it?
for me personally, I'm always going to make music. It's just something that I do. It's such a deep rooted part of me that I could never imagine being without it. I've always really liked the romantic idea of somebody that works just a normal job, maybe even a job they don't like, and then puts their everything into art.
Yeah.
And art becomes this thing that stands alone and cannot be touched by consumerism or capitalism or anything like that. It is this pure thing. It's one of these sort of like dirty little secrets that people don't like to talk about. That there's just no money, and especially now,
And when there
there's
is money, it ruins it. It's not like there isn't money to be made.
it doesn't necessarily have to be just this purely kind of either we make it and we're massively famous or not. For my own personal thing, it's I love the community of it. And I want to make good music that I'm proud of. For Dead Sentries and for Remarkable Shipwrecks, I would like them to be a little better known than they are. I don't really care about making tons of cash or whatever, or touring the world or whatever. Um, I would just like more people to know and enjoy the music and to share it with us. So
That's
I guess I have sort of humble kind of expectations. But on the other hand, I actually really love like the underground music scene where you're playing to a small crowd of people that you can interact with, and it's this intimacy and immediacy that you just don't get in like bigger shows or stadium shows or anything like that.
the venues and the culture is such an important part of what keeps the music alive. It's not just the fans, it's not just the people buying it, it's actually that whole community, that infrastructure of people who actually just go, yeah, hell yeah, I'll go out and see a band. It's playing at a venue I like. It's around the corner. It's part of my community.
Yeah, yeah. That's been the driving kind of force for me to keep doing it. Because if I looked at it like how popular are we, how much money are we making, all that kind of stuff, I would have just quit. But I'm doggedly hanging in there. I'm determined to like keep going. And again, like I would like it to be a little more well known. I'm re-releasing Remarkable Shipwreck stuff and doing that. And Sentries are working on a whole new record that's getting back to kind of our original sort of simple, groovy, and very rhythm orientated punk rock that deals with, you know, personal issues, political issues, and then some kind of silly stuff that we're getting into writing about. And you know, like all of I should mention this too, like most of the Remarkable Shipwreck stuff, there's a couple of Ableton tunes. The rest of it was done on like stuff like you know, like me singing with a broken guitar into a mini disc recorder. Sentry stuff has been done in these like really depressing rehearsal rooms where we are like this derelict, condemned sort of office building, and we're on the top floor, and it's just full of gear because 5 bands share the space. We go in with a friend of ours and a computer and some microphones, and we have 10 hours or 8 hours, and we do 10 songs and the vocals.
Well, do you know what, Simon? In the interest of directing people to what you would like them to get out of, say, watching an interview like this, which is totally random, you know, like let's pick a Dead Century song and a Remarkable Shipwreck song,
Oh,
and I'll chop them in, I'll add them in, and then I think you know, just fucking come back and play some shows. You have got some support. It's really great to talk to you about the music that you're making because I love music. I love it so much. I want it to grow and keep going, but I also want it to stay well anchored and well watered and healthy. And I don't
yeah,
like to see people ruining their lives over reaching for some sort of fame that only serves a capitalist interest. That really fucking shits me. So,
yeah.
where would you send people? Let's start with Dead Century. Where would you send them?
In terms of songs that kind of encapsulate what the band are about, um, on our latest release, Monkey Speak, there's a song called "Anyone Can Be President," which most people seem to get very excited about. That the key
I
sort of
also really
song.
like the gorilla one. That's amazing. That's my favorite. I prefer that to the president's one. I do.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that. I like that too. Both of them are kind of from the Trump sort of thing, um, and it's like uh, Guerrilla Channel is a really interesting way in how our songs come about because they're quite simple, but it takes us forever to write them because we argue about shit all the time. So I came in with this riff and I'm like, I've got this idea that I want like a blast beat and then it goes slower. And Stefan said, yeah, okay. And then just played this slow rhythmic thing the whole time.
That was
So
when
he
the
did,
Dead Kennedys really like wrote. That was when it came up in my brain. I was like, "Fuck me, this is like the Dead Kennedys." Okay, I get this.
yeah,
All right, so with Dead Centuries, let's send them. Let's send them to the Gorilla one because that's my
yep,
favorite, and I'm biased.
sure.
And the Shipwrecks, the Remarkable Shipwrecks. Which one would you?
Remarkable, with Remarkable Shipwrecks, for what it used to sound like, there's a song called All My Friends Are Haunted, which I wrote about a friend of mine who's now who's passed away recently. Um, I wrote that for him years ago because he'd left Berlin and I wanted him to come back. So that's All My Friends Are Haunted, and that's for Black Pony. Um, but for the newer stuff, there's one called Ride With Me, um,
Just the one that
which
you
is more of
I
a
really like.
groovy kind of a thing. So I would point them to those two.
I'm going to count you in. I'm going to say goodbye.
Hey everybody, my name's Simon. I'm from Dead Sentries and Remarkable Shipwrecks. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy the music and I hope you enjoy the show. Thanks for making it happen, Hermione. You take
No
care, all
worries,
right?
Simon. Bye.
Ciao.